Hey, so I wanted to take a second to show you guys kind of something that I've been working on here. I'm hoping that you can see the screen. Um, right, so I've spent the last few days kind of getting into testing and this kind of thing. I've seen a lot of sort of like job postings asking for people who can do unit testing, integration testing, end-to-end testing, white white box testing, gray box testing, black box testing, all of the different kinds, and kind of being early in my own journey into software and this kind of thing, I thought it would be great to make a video, if anything, just to demonstrate some knowledge and see if I can kind of like explain what it is that I'm learning, because there's so much, although it's all good. So a bit of context for this. A little while ago, a mentor of mine gave me a project and said, you should try to make a CI/CD pipeline. And for those of you who don't know what that is, I didn't. CI stands for continuous integration. CD stands for continuous deployment. And if that doesn't make it any more clear, you're not alone. I was in the same shoes. Basically, if you think about the way that businesses, kind of like software and tech companies in particular, operate, there is this big code base, sometimes even a mono repo that has a bunch of different kind of projects in the same space. And so it just gets really busy. And as opposed to kind of going through and trying to execute on everything, knowing like, for example, you want to build a car and then starting with each piece and kind of putting it together and not having a functional complete thing um, until the very end. That's kind of like typically called waterfall, I guess, in terms of project management, which is an entirely different thing. There's a sort of agile methodology, which I don't really know much about it, to be honest. I just know like it makes this fun kind of figure 8 diagram where part of it is continuous integration, which is where you build and you test your code. Building is a little bit sneaky of a word, just because it's not actually like the construction of it, but um, like Webpack and this kind of thing, like how your code actually gets built to be ready to deploy onto a server somewhere for somebody to interact with it, right? So building, you might have I guess like the main issue here is that you've got a lot of complexity in terms of like the people who are contributing and whether or not they're coming with the same environment, or whether or not they're all aligned on what it means to sort of like format code the right way, and whether or not there's sort of like a style guide. And some people omit a semicolon where they can, and some people don't, and tabs and spaces, right? So that kind of thing is yeah, kind of like a headache, right? And the more complex the project is, the basically the worse the worse your position is, right? Like if you don't have just alignment across everybody who's contributing to a code base, and which is really hard to do, um, then things are going to get messy, and they do. So the solution here is there are things like formatters. Prettier is one that we're going to talk about here. And then there are what's called linters. So they're kind of these bits of code that go through your code and do what's called static testing and try to identify patterns in your code that might be bad habits, or might break something somewhere, or might just generally be bad practice. And so without further ado, today, my project was to get through some static testing, and that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about. So if you want, I will probably link to this document and wherever I'm posting this. I think this one's going to go on YouTube. I don't know. We're having fun. We're going to see what happens here. Um, but yeah, you'll be able to get to this. I'm doing the 100 days of code, so all of this stuff is sitting on a repository somewhere if you ever want to take a look at it. So let's do a quick kind of like look at these headings, and you can read the details if you want. Basically, what is static testing? These are tests that don't actually end up, oh, if I keep double clicking, it's going to do that. Tests that don't really use any code. So like think of static testing as being something that you might have to configure. You need to tell it how you want your stuff formatted and how you want it to, or I guess what sort of style that you're looking to kind of bring across, depending on your needs and dependencies and all sorts of different things, your tech stack, obviously. This is JavaScript that we're going to be looking at, specifically JavaScript and React. Um, so we're in my use case, it's mostly testing front end apps. But there's stuff to test back end and all of this kind of thing. The goal is to save time and catch the low hanging fruit, right? So like before you get to the point where you have to actually ship your code, you've got all of these sorts of tests and fail safes and small shots along the way before you commit, right? And so part of this idea of CI/CD is that you commit often, you test against your code, right? There's like test-driven development, which is this whole thing that it seems like a lot of people are into jumping on the hype train, but don't fully understand. It's hard to find good resources on it, which is why it's taken me so much effort to get through this. But anyway, taking too long, we'll just take a quick look at tooling. So TypeScript, I've heard from some people that all you need is TypeScript. You don't really need, they even go as so far as to say that you don't even need to have unit testing or integration testing and this kind of thing. But, that's a pretty extreme point of view. You probably want to have something, honestly, not even in between, but leaning more toward being test driven, but not necessarily trying to, I guess, set up guardrails in a way is the way that I've heard it, right? Like I just started writing tests, but I got into it and wanted to apply it to this project that I'll show you guys in a second, mainly because like I saw that it was valuable and people wanted me to do it, and I was curious about how that approach works, because it's sort of like defining user stories from a spec that you then try to translate into code that just gets the test to pass if it's a good test. And so still learning what it means to write a good one, still trying to understand what static testing is. Well, I guess like what dynamic testing is, that's a totally different video. But yeah, basically tooling is anything that's going to kind of like make red squiggly lines in your VS Code editor and tell you that, you got to change something somewhere. You can run these things. I'll show you what some of these look like. And then it breaks down into like the ones that I was looking into specifically were ESLint and Prettier. And we'll talk a little bit about Git hooks. So if you're not familiar with Git or GitHub, I would say start. It's definitely something valuable. Even if you don't become a developer, that's not what you're looking to do. It's just an interesting way to learn about how teams work and how you can get stuff done. Plenty of interesting things, and it's all mostly accessible. It's not like learning a new language, which is kind of what my impression was, especially with Git. Anyway, why ESLint? What is ESLint? So we talked about linters. That's what ESLint is. It statically analyzes code in your editors, and you can also set it up on your continuous integration pipeline. So basically, anytime somebody's committing code to a code base, you can run this static test before you actually push it into production, right? Or before you start going through all of your dynamic tests, right? So you might have tests that go through all of your functions or your React components, but before you get there, basically, if you can imagine, like we were talking about, everybody's contributing their code. Instead of getting this sort of melting pot of everybody's style and formatting, you can sort of set these rules up that we'll talk about, and you can sort of set up a little more structure so that that code is, I guess, more uniform and easier to maintain, easier to manage. Right, so you can also make syntax aware fixes. Syntax aware just means like it's not going to break your app. ESLint and Prettier both work really hard to not break what it is that you're doing. Although I would say with ESLint that you do need to be a little bit more careful with like what you do and with the fix flag in particular. Like if you set that up kind of to work automatically, which is the point of a lot of this DevOpsy kind of CI/CD type of stuff, is to reduce work, not cause headaches. And definitely introducing breaking changes to your code automatically when you're not looking is problematic. So got to be careful with that. But otherwise, it's a really cool tool. I really enjoyed kind of digging into it. We'll move on to Prettier. So Prettier is really simple. It's kind of hilarious. You've got to read the docs because there are people who are super opinionated on every little nitty gritty detail. Try to say that one 5 times fast. Right. So basically what Prettier says on their site is like, we don't really care what your opinions are. This is something to take all of the minutia and bike shedding out of the like it's the whole tabs and spaces thing. Saves time and energy, and I guess some emotional energy as well, based off of what I've read and how into formatting people get, which, I mean, there's something for everyone. Everyone can get into something, right? It's very frustrating that this keeps happening, and I'm sorry. Yeah, right. So some of the details, we'll just talk about that over here. I do want to talk about one thing before we dive into this. If you want to see a video on how to actually go through and set up Prettier and how to actually set up ESLint together, because if you think about what a linter is doing, if it's going through and making changes to your code or recommending changes to your code, and then there's this other thing that's strictly trying to format it, there's some overlap there. And so the setup is a bit complicated because ESLint is actually doing a little bit of what Prettier is trying to do, and that division has not been made clear yet. Like that territory is still kind of shared, and so you do need to do some stuff to make sure that your tests run and that your stuff builds. But we'll get to some stuff later. And then finally, I just want to mention, probably won't get too deep into it, but Husky is kind of a neat tool that lets you, like, it gives you access to Git hooks. And that's, I wanted to leave that here sort of toward the end. Git hooks, basically, like for every Git action you want to take, whether that's pushing code or pre-commit, there's like, before you actually commit your code, there's some action that happens, right? So there's a sort of pre-commit hook where before you decide to push your code up, these automated tests run, or rather these static tests analyze your code, tell you how it's looking in terms of test coverage, which that's actually, I was watching a video today that said you don't even need test coverage, and all sorts of neat things. So as you can see, there's static testing, lovely, straightforward. Dynamic testing, which is like trying to come up with basically all of the different scenarios that your user might go through, and having this idea of coverage, which can be misleading. So like, don't aim for 100% of your code getting tested with like every single implementation detail, like having to give you a green check mark. That's not really how it works. And again, as that's honestly a topic for an entirely separate video. So I'll move on from that. We're going to talk about ESLint, Prettier, and kind of what those do. So I'm going to show you this app and pull up a terminal here. So the app that we're going to be working in is something that I coded up as a portfolio project inspired by Wordle, which is just such a good game. And I think his name is Josh Wordle, who's this ex-Reddit engineer, just made such cool stuff. Really wanted to kind of like get into the guts of how that works. And see what's going on there. So I'm just going to do npm I here and make sure that all of my dependencies are downloaded. But while that's happening, I want you guys to take a quick look kind of over here. All right, let me see. Can I zoom? I really should have thought about this. I'm just kind of jumping into this video. So if it feels sort of like piecemeal together, it's because it is. Okay, cool. We got some zoom. So you can see over here that we've got this ESLint ignore. These kind of follow the same format as your git ignore. If you're not familiar with that, basically like these are, you give your code directions here for things not to look at. Here, this YAML file is the one that we're interested in. So we'll just open this up so you guys can kind of see what these types of files look like. Basically, what you're doing here is you're telling ESLint that this is the root folder. So you can have, or root YAML file. You can have these kind of, like, you can see that there's components and modules and all sorts of things here. And even within the components folders, there's subfolders and subfolders. So you can have ESLint go through starting from some child directory and working its way up and then putting a root somewhere. I've just put this root file at the root of this directory because it seemed easy. I don't really need to have ESLint doing different things by different components. This isn't really that complicated of a project. So with that said, we should probably npm start so you guys can just get a sense. It doesn't really matter what I'm working on here. We're going to do things in a test file, but just so you can see, this is the app. It's kind of like what I've been working on. You can put stuff in and it should render, you know, all this conditional logic and do React type things. And you can kind of like click on a new game and see your stats and blah, blah, blah. So there's plenty of stuff to test here, right? And that's kind of what I wanted to figure out and try out. It just seemed like with all of the different components between the tiles and the keys and all these things highlighting, especially with this one, there's all these different words. By the way, Codal didn't explain, it's all coding and software related vocabulary. So just kind of stuff that, well, like you guys saw, there's image, but there's also props, and it's just stuff that I pulled that was 5 letters off of Mozilla Developer Network. So yeah, basically what you want is to set this file up. So as you're moving through your code, if you're doing something kind of wonky, and we're gonna do something really just horrible here, we'll do const my, well, just horribly misspelled function equals, and then we'll just do a lot of weird spacing here and then pass our args in. How else can we make this horrible and give people nightmares? We'll do this, and then we'll put a comment here. So I'm sure you guys are seeing there's these red squigglies, right? So what these are is actually ESLint. You can see it over here, and it's throwing some sort of a, well, it's not really throwing an error. What it's actually doing is it's giving me IntelliSense on this rule that I have set up. So there's no unused vars. You'll notice that here I've declared a constant, but I've not used it. And so just so you can see really quickly, and thank goodness things get recommended here, that's gone away, but then something pops over here and you can see that I'm missing a semicolon, which is just a part of this linter and what it's trying to do. You can see trailing spaces are not allowed. So like this is a trailing space, right? So as I I guess just create white space that's taking unnecessary data, although it's unlikely that your code's going to be slow because you've got too much white space. It's just a small optimization and something that you can do here fairly quickly. One other thing that I actually have going on here is you'll notice down here there's this sort of formatting toggle. This is set to do, well, basically format my code for me automatically. Let's say like when I save, it'll tighten up and kind of come down here and you'll see that there's a comment, obviously. I can, well, I won't console.log. I'll show you. I have a rule here that says that I can't leave console logs in just because, you know, you don't want to be shipping a bunch of console logs that say, please work. Oh my gosh, please. I've been working on this for so long. Please, right? And obviously there's all these errors here because none of these are variables. And so we would want to escape that and put a semicolon here, but you guys kind of get the sense. This is what's going on. Right, so this is kind of neat, and I really like this. So one of my favorite features about what's going on here with both of these really, and I'm going to exit out of here. Well, not exit, we'll clear this up. Is that you can copy paste, you can have things kind of auto format while you're typing, and then you just get these really good recommendations from your linter. So you can actually, up here, you'll see there's this extends. There are different, I guess, oh God, what would you call these? I guess sort of like best practices that are available, but that's not what I'm trying to say here. It's sort of like arguments that you can pass in here. You can extend various, well, there are plugins, right? But then other people basically make these ESLint, how am I forgetting what they're called? It's not exactly a module, but basically just imagine like somebody's put their own YAML together here with all of these rules on what they consider to be best practices, and you're in good company because Airbnb has one, and so does Google. Obviously, just check to see if they're maintained or not. This one's pretty simplistic. For example, you can see for semicolons, it's going to throw an error always for every instance where I have a statement, but not a semicolon at the end. For quotes, it's going to throw an error, and it wants everything to be in single quotes for me. This is actually, I'm going to change this to double, and you guys can see what I'm talking about here, right? So everything here was a single quote. This is going to cause problems, right? So we'll kind of come back to that in a second, and then jump into the Prettier RC. Prettier, as I explained, doesn't really want to be loosey-goosey about things. They don't want to have a bunch of issues about everybody coming in and expressing opinions about what's right and what's wrong. They have kind of put their stake in the ground and said, we are opinionated. Do not come to us with issues. But it's great because you get a sense of continuity, and everybody's code ends up snapping together pretty similarly to kind of what you saw here, right? Obviously, this is a horrifying function that I need to get off the screen right now. But I just kind of want to show you a little bit of how these two come together. So I'm using Husky, which is kind of what does this pre-commit business for me, but it's also because I'm doing this strange combination. It's not strange, but it's not perfect yet. There's this lint and Prettier combination. I need to use lint staged. So once something gets staged, Husky gets triggered, and it kicks off a workflow through this Git hook. So let's see, like right now, I would need to do this. It's just so you guys can see, all of this stuff lives here. And specifically what I'm about to do is run an npm script for tests and for lint, so you can see kind of what's going on there, but also for, and it's down here, you can see in that lint staged item, for any file that ends in a JavaScript file extension here, I'm going to run the linter, and then afterwards, so the linter is just going to make sure that there's nothing egregious and that the style is kind of what we said that we wanted. And then Prettier here, this right flag automatically goes through and kind of snaps everything. So for example, if you forgot to make a bunch of changes in another file somewhere and you trust that Prettier is going to do what you think it's going to do, hopefully it is. By the way, one of their goals is to not break anything. So even if they do kind of sort and rearrange your code, it's still going to have the same functionality. That's sort of their promise, and I've not had any problems with it. I think it's really just, it's great, massive productivity boost, not having to worry about spacing things around and making sure that everything is lined up. So yeah, without any further ado, we're just gonna hop up here and run our Git hook, which we'll check the status here. We'll see that we've made 2 changes here to the test, and YAML will make a commit here, testing for the YouTubes. Okay, cool. Right. Oh, changes not staged for, of course. Yeah, don't forget to add, guys. Adding is important. So you can see my tests are running, and then there were 251 problems because I switched from single quote to double quote. You can see basically what the output looks like here. 251 issues, right? So I would have to fix every single one of these. 0 of the warnings or nothing here is fixable, right? Like if you run it with this fix flag, which I don't personally like to do because ESLint does sometimes do things that kind of break code, especially with React. It's not perfect, and I haven't set up my YAML perfectly. Basically, I'm gonna have to come up here and go back to single quotes. And we know what happened. Can you guys guess what's going to go on if I am running a function here? Let's just do an anonymous one. Wait, that's not what we wanted, right? So we actually want this in double quotes. Some text. All right, make a guess. We're going to run it with the single quote setting now and see what we get. Cool. 251 problems. Oh, right. Again, you'll see that I'm exercising. Well, you'll see how new I am basically with Git anything. We'll just write this commit here again. Okay, cool. Yeah, and you can see that there's some problem here, and we do get something back. Running tests for stage files, package JSON, skip because of errors from task. Okay, so here what we're going to do is, just for the sake of time, I mean, we know what's causing the issue here, but if you really wanted to check it out, you could, I think with ESLint, can we just npm lint it here and see what the npm run lint, oops. You got to do this stuff live so you can reinforce it, right? Parsing error, unexpected token return, one problem, one warning, React version not specified. Okay, that's kind of fine. There's a parsing error here. I'm not sure. Oh, that's probably from the function. Yeah, right. You don't actually need a return statement. And then for some text here, it's going to tell us that we need single quotes. All right, debugging. Running again, and you can see that it's throwing the proper error here, which is that the strings must be single quote. So let's see, we can do a quick fix. Oh, so it says fix this, disable. I forgot that ESLint won't go through necessarily and do this unless you switch it to the fix flag, which, okay, actually, because this is the only thing that has an issue and nothing else is going to get edited, here's what we can do. We can go to the package.json like we were in and take a look at where we're running this. Right, so there's a lint fix script that I have in here, which we love because it's super convenient. You can just kind of run the same exact function. Oh yeah, let's switch that to clear. Run lint fix, and it's going to give us back the double quotes version. And now we'll go through and you'll see that that ESLint kind of made the updates and everything's good. So we can run npm tests. I don't think anything's going to change here, but I'll just run all the tests so you can see. So this is kind of what unit tests will look like, and what it looks like when it's running, and you get all of these sorts of like metrics that come back, including stuff on code coverage, which usually there's something more detailed there, but you can kind of see enter key contains enter text, which is a silly unit test. Button is enabled, also kind of silly for this one. Obviously the button's going to be enabled, but you kind of get the point. And you can do async tests there as well. Holy moly, this ended up being way more than I was expecting. But yeah, that's kind of a quick look. So we'll wrap it up with a summary here. So we talked a little bit about static testing. We talked about the tooling. We specifically looked into ESLint, which statically analyzes your code, both in your editor of choice and in a CI pipeline. So for continuous integration, you can get style all matched up together for prettier. It's for formatting and making sure that the code actually has the right structure to it. It's way more surface level, it's way more opinionated, but it's widely popular and loads of people seem to be fine with it. And there's enough options, I think, from their early days of sort of pandering to try to get people to actually adopt it, to actually do whatever it is that you might want to do, knowing that it is opinionated. So there are some options, although it kind of goes against the point of what they really want to be doing. And then finally, we talked a little bit about Husky and using Husky with, what was it? What is it called? Spacing on it. Hold on. It's in here. All right, I forgot, whatever. Yeah, we talked about Husky. Can you see me getting lost and continuing to click around? Wow, I'm really gonna have to work on these videos. Anyway, yeah, you guys get the point. Husky is running ESLint and Prettier on each of your commits. Like before you commit something, it's called a pre-commit hook, and it lets you hook in to Git's functionality and do some stuff to make sure that your stuff is doing the stuff it's supposed to do. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Hi. Um, Thanks for watching. If you're watching this, I hope this is helpful and not just more confusing. If you want resources, I'll link to stuff in the comment section below, I guess. All right, doing stuff on YouTube. Bye.